May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Amen. Please be seated. Jesus, like Moses centuries earlier, goes up a mountain and utters some of the most significant words of his life and of the history of the people of faith. The Beatitudes, which Deacon Sue just proclaimed, are a guide to what it means to be Christian. Some theologians call them the most important words ever written. So I guess the question for us today is, what, according to the Beatitudes, does it look like to be a Christian? We all know that Jesus didn't just speak the gospel. He lived it. It turns out the Beatitudes are nothing less than the story of Jesus. And the story, the sacrificial life of Jesus, is brought to its fulfillment in the cross and the resurrection. Jesus is poor in spirit when he's taken on the sin of the whole world. He mourns when he visits the grave of Lazarus, his friend. He's meek when he's falsely accused and yet never says a mumbling word, as the spiritual says. He hungers and thirsts for righteousness when he declares in the face of the temptations before the devil, "Worship the Lord your God and serve only him." He's merciful when he heals the sick, the paralyzed, the lame, and welcomes the outcast and the sinner. He's pure in heart when he says, "Not my will, but your will." He's a peacemaker when he tells Peter to put down his sword. He's persecuted and reviled by leaders at every moment. The Beatitudes are Jesus' autobiography. The Beatitudes are Jesus saying, "This is who I am, and this is how to be like me. This is how to be me, to be my body in the world today." To be a Christian is to live the Beatitudes. And every Beatitude comes in three parts. There's the first part, that is the description of the life Jesus lived and where we find ourselves at times. Then there's the last part, that is the description of the fulfillment of God's reign. They will be comforted. They will inherit the earth, receive mercy, will be called children of God. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And yet there's something more. There's one more part to each beatitude. Do you know what it is? I suppose no one read my note in the annual report. The Reverend Sam Wells, vicar of the Church of St. Martin in the Fields in London, has written and preached that between the cross and the resurrection lies a comma. A comma. He notes that every beatitude has a comma in the middle. That comma is a kind of valley between the horror of the cross and the wonder of the resurrection. Let's think about that comma. For Wells, that pause, that place where the sacrifice of Jesus' whole life and the fulfillment of the reign of God meet, that comma is our life as Christians. Wells says to be a Christian is to dwell in the comma that lies between the first and the second half of the Beatitude. That comma is your home on earth. That comma represents the way and the joy of Christian life. That comma is where you find Jesus. Here at St. Paul's, it is clear that we strive to dwell in the comma, helping God to transform lives. And so, on this annual meeting Sunday, to what a friend calls my State of the Union address. Over the last few years, one of the things that I have been most impressed and inspired by has been the ministry of your fellow parishioners engaging the work of the College for Congregational Development. For many decades, many people in many denominations have spent many hours talking about congregational development. Here we are striving to do it. And I believe we are in the midst of transformation that could be more lasting than flash in a pan, if harnessed properly and faithfully. Coming out of this COVID tide, I believe that strong communities of faith beget even stronger communities of faith. We do this by leaning into and leading with what is working well and building on our strengths and shared values as we serve Christ in new and familiar ways. We know God is at work and reliably transforming lives in the prayer and worship of a community. For St. Paul's, prayer and worship is the heartbeat of our parish. Whether it is on a Sunday morning or at our Holy Day liturgies, or with a devoted group of lay people on Thursday's Zoom morning prayer. Our community finds strength and solace in prayer and worship. I am grateful to all of our worship leaders, to our altar guild and acolytes, our flower ministry, our lectors and Eucharistic ministers, and our reformed usher corps. I am particularly grateful to Robert for his leadership, vision, and creativity, and to Augustine and to all of our choirs for their faithful ministries. We all sing and ring your praises. Stemming from the fellowship of the Eucharistic table, we find God transforming lives in our parish fellowship. Just last week, I was chatting at one table about how wonderful it is to see the parish hall full again during fellowship hour. The downside being there are no leftover bagels on Monday morning for the staff, but I digress. Whether it's at our monthly potluck, where there is always almost too much good food, or at special events, it is heartwarming to see connections being made and the community growing. Just a plug, save the date for the return of the chili cook-off on Saturday, March 25th. Now, life in community isn't limited to just food. God is found in how we connect with one another here, which we do in many ways, which includes our needle arts ministry or our wonderful altar flower delivery ministry. I am particularly excited by Jay's dogged determination in caring for the spiritual needs of our youth and young adults, vital members of our parish family. Our youth group is focused on Christian formation, fellowship, and mission and meets twice a month. Thank you for getting this off the ground again and again and again. And thank you, Jay, for all the many ways you touch and shape the life of St. Paul's. Deacon Sue, who joined us just a few months before COVID lockdowns, is finally getting to see what a normal season looks like here. And she continues her faithful work of service and care in our parish. And just a note that Deacon Sue is now a grandmother again. Baby Owen, yes, the applause for that is fine. Baby Owen and Mom are now home from the hospital, and this morning Diane had brought in a quilt that she had knit on behalf of the Needle Arts Ministry that she presented to Sue, and what she didn't know is that I have a prayer shawl sitting up in the pulpit. But before the service, Sue was talking about how blankets are needed in the NICU. So you can either, Sue, give this to baby Owen or bring it to the NICU. We find the spiritual needs of our parishioners also being addressed in our lifelong learning programs. We will have an opportunity during the business meeting to say thank you more appropriately, but thanks to Nancy Greer for her 8 years as the interim coordinator of our adult faith formation program. Our program year, with its many offerings from Sunday Forum to book groups to EFM post-grad group and more, has been and will continue to be carefully planned out. Thank you to all who are involved, including our adjunct professor, John Hazard, and Lydia, our seminarian intern. It has been a true joy to have Lydia with us in September for one of her seminarian intern years. Her enthusiasm for ministry and learning is a refreshing addition, and her preaching and teaching represents a wisdom and poise far beyond her years. Lydia could not be with us this Sunday as she's with her family down in Bath dealing with a family emergency. And our prayers and thoughts are with her and her family. I mentioned our revitalized youth group. We should take a moment to note the faithful work of Amy Welker, who works tirelessly and creatively to help our youngest members learn the story of God's love. Dory and Candace, our nursery workers, also seem to have their hands a bit more full these days. Thank you to them, and, well, to some of you, I suppose. All that I've named and everything else we do isn't possible without the administrative and practical support provided by a truly dedicated staff here. Thank you to Natasha, Lisa, and Judy for knowing that good administration is good spiritual care. Last year, Sonia joined our team to work on communications and digital ministry. This not only attempts to address a need for today, or yesterday really, it is also forward-thinking as the church moves into the future. Along those lines, I am very excited that little old St. Paul's in Rochester, we're finalists to host next year's National Episcopal Communicators Conference, already knocking Portland, Maine, and Boston out of the running. So maybe we'll have a chance as long as Cincinnati isn't another finalist. So. Too soon? Too soon? Okay. Thank you to Bob, Dave, and Jim for their hard work and true commitment to St. Paul's. Their roles are vital to our success, and without them, so much of what we do to dwell in the comma couldn't happen here. There is always something to do in these buildings that are over 125 years old, always something to keep us on our toes, whether it is a pipe breaking or the now infamously supply chain boiler project nearing its completion. Our sound system upgrades still in progress have made a difference already. The property committee is looking at upgrading our lighting, and I am pleased to announce that last year we received an unexpected and significant lead gift towards air conditioning the church from Mary Criticos. An act of generosity and hospitality. Thank you, Mary. You've heard me say over the years a few dozen times by now, just coming to church and calling yourself a Christian is like standing in the garage and calling yourself a car. Our worship, our liturgy moves us, drives us, sends us out to make Christ's transforming love known to the world. And we do that in many ways here. We do this by collecting food and clothes for and preparing a to-go monthly meal at St. Joe's House of Hospitality. We do this by working to find a new way to partner with Family Promise, formerly RAIN. We do this by donating supplies, books, and gifts to School Number 9, by resuming to cook a Sunday meal twice a year for the Episcopal Lutheran Campus Ministry at RIT-NTID, by collecting for the Veterans Outreach Center, by baking in our new Manna Ministry, and so much more. We value our partnership with the Diocesan Ministry for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, and this includes soon adding a monthly Bible study with ASL interpretation open to all. We share the magnificent resources of our space for little to no shared cost with a child care center, multiple 12-step groups, and many organizations, including the Hearing Loss Association of America and the Eastman School of Music. We also dwell in the comma by sharing our financial resources entrusted to our care by our ancestors in faith. This important work is done through the Outreach Council, the Rector's Discretionary Fund, and through your generosity. In the last year, God's transformative love has been made known as we've supported Episcopal Relief and Development, Water for South Sudan, City Roots Community Land Trust, Rural and Migrant Ministries, Mothers in Need of Others, Episcopal Senior Life Communities, and so many others. So what does it look like to be a Christian? it looks an awful lot like St. Paul's. Back to our friend Sam Wells. Christians are those who dwell in the comma of the Beatitudes, in the place where the cross meets the resurrection, in the time between Jesus' life on earth and the fullness of the reign of God. Wells says, dwelling in the comma is where we meet Jesus. This is what Christianity is. This is where we find it. This is how we live it. This is blessedness. As we move into this year, we will continue to ask the good questions. Where do we meet God here, and where is God renewing and changing lives? How do we nurture our congregation? Who are we? What are we here for? And who is our neighbor, and how do we relate to them? To say it another way, how will we continue to meet Christ in the commas of this life? May God, who has given us the will to do all of these things, continue to give us the grace and power to perform them. Amen.
Amen.